I don't remember the exact moment my house became too big for me. Sometimes I think it happened on an ordinary morning, when the sunlight slipped through the blinds and found no one to play with the dust hanging in the air. Other times, I think the house had always been too big. I was just too busy to notice. I spent a lifetime filling shelves and emptying silences, and without realizing it, I became good at finishing spreadsheets, but terrible at finishing conversations. What was left of me in those days were closed doors and lights left on in empty rooms, signs of presence meant to fool absence. I could pretend it was a choice. It was easier to say I preferred the quiet than to admit I no longer knew how to invite life in. Until one afternoon, while washing the same cup for the third time, unable to remember if I already had, the doorbell rang. It was the mailman, holding a brown envelope, one of those that look ordinary until you see your name written in a firm hand. Inside was a social services leaflet, photos of children who needed a home, and a simple line that read, "Family is where someone is expected." I placed my hands on the counter, as if bracing against a wave that arrived slowly. I hadn't been expected by anyone in years. That paper wandered around the house for days, moving from table to table, as if searching for courage. I sat, stood, paced, reluctant to admit that my loneliness had shape and an address. I called the number. The voice on the other end listened like someone who already knew the way to places most people avoid. There were interviews, questions that felt like maps. Why now? What are you looking for? Who are you when no one's watching? I answered what I could, and what I couldn't, silence answered for me. They said I needed time. Everything there had the rhythm of what's meant to last. The day I met the boy, it rained. Not a grand storm, just that thin rain that seeps through a jacket zipper and reminds your skin it exists. He was sitting at a table with a notebook open, his hands resting still on the page, as if afraid to ruin the white. The social worker said his name was Noah. He didn't stand when he saw me, only shifted his gaze, measuring the distance with quiet precision. I said hi louder than I meant to. He answered without lifting his head. I remember thinking that answering without moving your head is something you learn early when you don't want to be noticed. We stood there, two strangers in a long corridor. I talked about my blue car, my fear of cooking without a recipe, about the time I tried assembling furniture and ended up with one leftover piece that I swore wasn't extra. He gave a short laugh, not quite a laugh, more like a crack where air slipped through. And through that crack, something alive entered. The social worker offered paper and pencils, so we could draw while talking. I drew a crooked clock, he drew a window. "Is that the window you look through?" I asked. He shrugged. "It's just a window." But when I looked closer, there was a small rectangle in the corner, like a reflection, glass within glass. "I like that," I said. He pressed his lips to hide a smile. And I understood. Sometimes the right compliment is the one that respects silence. The visits continued for weeks. Sometimes we played a game. Each said one truth and one lie, and the other had to guess. "I've slept outdoors," he said, "and I can speak 2 languages. I guessed wrong on both. I almost drowned once," I said, "and I'm afraid of heights." He asked, "Where did you almost drown?" Not out of morbid curiosity, but because where is often the question that finds how. I told him about the river, the current, the friend who pulled me out by the shoulder at the last second. He opened his eyes wide, and in that look, I read something like, "If you've been saved, maybe you know how to save." It took time before the house became officially ours. The corridor of social services turned into a familiar path. I collected documents, answered questionnaires, rewrote versions of myself that no longer fit. The day the social worker said, "It's ready," I didn't celebrate loudly. I sighed. Sometimes breathing is the exact sound of gratitude. We went home together. Noah entered first. He dropped his backpack in the living room and scanned every corner like someone testing the weight of a promise. I showed him his room, a simple bed, a touch lamp, a shelf waiting for books, and space in the closet with the doors slightly open, so he could decide if he wanted them closed. "If you want to change anything, we can," I said. He nodded, opened the window, and spent a few minutes looking at the street, confirming, perhaps, that it's possible to look outside without losing the feeling of being inside. The first weeks were made of small agreements. I'd ask how his day was. He'd answer with 1 word, sometimes 2. I didn't push. We had a notebook on the kitchen table, the notebook of questions that can wait. At night, he'd write something short, and I'd reply in the morning before coffee. "Can I lock my door?" he wrote. "Yes," I replied. And if one day you prefer not to, I'll still wait for you to open it. If I forget to say good night, will you be mad? I'll still be here. Not mad. What's the first thing you wanted to be as a kid? Someone who could fix clocks and people, I wrote. Didn't manage either. But I learned to wait for the right time in others. He collected small rituals, arranged books by height, folded socks like sea waves, kept stickers in a pencil box that seemed more important than its contents. One day, I found a piece of ribbon inside with two initials, M and E, written together, as if someone tied two letters so they wouldn't get lost. Whose is this? I asked. It was someone's, he said, and that was the end of it. Not out of disinterest, but respect for the time of wounds. I kept that ribbon in my mind, not to investigate, but to remember. Even in new houses, memories live in small things. The nights were calm. He slept on his side, knees slightly bent, like someone ready to run but choosing not to. Sometimes I'd stand by his door just to hear the sound of his breathing, the sound of the world working. And I'd think about the invisible threads that connect people who never knew each other until life decides to make them meet. I didn't know what kind of father I'd be, but I knew this much. Maybe being a father is learning to stand at the edges without falling, so the other gains courage to take the center. Changes came slowly. He started sitting on the living room floor to draw, instead of standing like someone always ready to leave. He asked to hang a painting in the hallway, a window at sunset that never ends. He said he liked leaving his door not open, not closed. And I understood that even walls learn trust. One Saturday morning, he waited for me with 2 glasses on the table, water in mine, juice in his. "Will you help me with something?" he asked. Of course. He spread wooden pieces and screws across the table. It was a bookshelf. "I'm not good at this," I confessed. He said, "Then we can be bad together." We spent 2 hours building something crooked that fit us perfectly. In the end, there was 1 screw left over. I swore it was extra. He looked at me seriously. "No screw is extra." We laughed, and that line stayed with me, like the lessons that arrived disguised as jokes. Time teaches absences too. One Sunday during lunch, Noah asked if I had family. "I have a sister, Emily." He chewed slowly. "Do you see each other?" I swallowed hard. "It's been a long time." He didn't ask why. Maybe he understood without words that family is often made of shortcuts no one dares to take. That night, I pulled from the back of the closet a box of old letters and photos I hadn't looked at in years. There was one of Emily as a child, scraped knees, smiling like someone who didn't yet know the things she'd forget, and another of me holding a baby. I didn't remember holding him for long, not because I'd forgotten the baby, but because I'd forgotten I could be different from the man I became. Memory sometimes takes us back to places where we should have been but weren't. Noah noticed my silence but didn't ask. Instead, he sat beside me on the couch and rested his head on my shoulder, as if saying, "I understand emptiness too." That was the first time he called me Dad. He didn't say the full word, it was a pa that never finished. He chose to call me by my name. I didn't correct him. Names are bridges. One day, he'd cross when he was ready. Good things tend to call others, and out of nowhere the school started sending notes with compliments that felt like messages from a life I'd never had. Noah presented an art project with rare sensitivity. Noah helped a classmate who was in trouble. I filed them all in a clear folder and promised myself not to let any slip through the days. I learned to make pancakes, bad at first, with charm, good later with the right flour, and once a month we invented a no-screen day, so we could listen to the noise inside without the noise outside. Even so, the house had old sounds. Some nights I heard small footsteps in the hallway, a pause at my door, a light touch on the wood, nothing more. I'd whisper good night, and he'd go back. It wasn't fear of monsters, it was fear of broken promises. I'd had that too. One morning, I left a note in the notebook of questions that can wait. "The promises I make to you I will keep. And if one day I can't, I'll tell you I can't and explain why." He wrote back, "I like it when you explain why." And I thought that maybe simple honesty is the most beautiful thing an adult can give a child. Spring arrived the way things that don't ask permission do, by opening the windows from the inside. The social worker came to visit and brought an envelope with a document, the final officialization of the adoption. I read it slowly, with the care of someone signing their own name in a story that's just beginning. Noah stood there, hands behind his back, eyes alert as if the letters might run away. "Want to sign with me?" I asked, pointing at the blank space waiting for my signature. "I can't," he said. "Yes, you can. Sign right under mine. We'll write 2 names on the same line, and that'll be our way of saying no one can erase it. He held the pen like someone learning both a weapon and a wing at once. He wrote Noah in small letters. Then he looked at me like someone who had just learned the weight of ink. Is it real now? He asked. It already was, I said. But paper helps the world believe. I wanted to say that from there on out everything would be easy. But life, even when it gets better, is still life. One Saturday, we went to the market, and an older woman asked, with a curiosity that wasn't mean but still hurt, "Is he really your son?" I smiled. "Yes." She insisted. "By blood?" I breathed, counted to 4, and answered, "By commitment." Noah squeezed my hand. In the car, he asked why people want to know about blood. Because they're afraid to discover that love is a choice, and if it's a choice, maybe they haven't chosen yet. He stayed quiet for a few blocks. "I choose you," he said, looking straight ahead. The world outside went on the same, but inside the car something had light. Another afternoon, organizing the bookshelf, Noah found a small box of things I kept out of habit. Keys without locks, orphaned buttons, coins from places I never really knew. He thought it was funny that I kept them. "Why don't you throw them away?" I laughed. "Because I always think one day I'll figure out where they belong." He opened his palm and placed the ribbon with the initials M and E there. "Is this yours too?" I asked. "It belonged to someone," he replied again. I wanted to ask more, but I swallowed my hurry. Hurry, I learned late, is the enemy of trust. The weeks passed with the cadence of things that work without headlines. Noah started afternoon drawing classes. I adjusted my schedule to pick him up. Sometimes he came out with graphite on his face and a random sheet that, to my eyes, looked like a star map. I learned his friends' names. He learned to laugh with his shoulders. One night, heavy rain knocked the power out. We sat on the living room floor with flashlights and a pile of books. He asked me to read aloud a story about a lighthouse that stayed lit even when no one needed it. "A lighthouse reminds us the path exists even when we're not walking it," I said. He leaned against my arm. The sound of the rain turned the house into a shell. "If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love picturing your streets while I speak. And if this story is touching something inside you, subscribe. It tells me I'm not talking to myself and helps me keep going." The next morning, after that night of flashlights, we found an envelope in the mailbox with no sender. Inside, an old photo, a baby wrapped in a blanket, a large hand holding the head gently, and a watch on the wrist that I recognized as if it were mine. Not the watch, the gesture. On the back, 2 initials, M and E, the same as on the ribbon. Noah stared at the image like someone seeing a piece of himself in a mirror he didn't know existed. "Who sent it?" he asked. I didn't know. I put the photo in a clear folder with the school notes. That night, before bed, Noah asked if I believed that things find their way back. I said yes, when we learn not to lock the wrong doors. He turned on his side, pulled the blanket up to his chin, and in a thread of voice said something I almost didn't hear. "I think someone is looking for us." I stayed there, listening to his breathing, thinking that sometimes truth arrives like that, first as a fine rain, then as the sound of footsteps coming from afar. The weeks after that photo were different. There was something new in the air, a restlessness I tried to disguise with routine. Noah seemed more curious, more attentive to the way I moved, the words I chose. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, as if trying to decipher an old memory on someone else's face. I pretended not to notice, maybe because part of me didn't want to know what there was to decipher. That night, while he slept, I picked up the photo again. The baby wrapped in a blanket, the steady hand holding the head. There was tenderness in the gesture, but also something far too familiar. It wasn't just the watch on the wrist. It was the way the thumb touched the child's face. I had done that before, but with whom? I left the photo on the table and went to the old room where I kept boxes from a life I pretended not to remember. Among yellowed papers, I found a letter from my sister, Emily. The envelope was torn, the ink blurred by time, but a few words were still readable. I couldn't raise him, but I couldn't abandon him either. I did what I thought was right. I hope one day you'll understand. My chest tightened. The letter was 18 years old. Emily had disappeared suddenly, right after a troubled pregnancy. No one in the family ever talked about it. I didn't ask either. People have a strange talent for pushing secrets into the darkest corner of the heart and calling it peace. The next day, I tried to call her. The old number was gone. I searched social media, public records, anywhere that might contain a trace. Nothing. Emily seemed erased from the map. And the more I looked, the more the pieces began to fit in places I didn't want to see. Noah, meanwhile, seemed to feel the weight of the silence, even without knowing where it came from. He started asking questions that caught me off guard. Were you and your sister close? Did you fight? Does she have kids? I answered the minimum. He accepted it, but I could see in his eyes there was more behind those questions. Children have that terrible gift for sniffing out what adults try to hide. One afternoon after school, he came home with a different look. He sat at the table, put his pencil case in front of him, and took out the ribbon with the initials. Do you know what these letters mean? He asked. I hesitated. I think I do. He kept his eyes on me. I think I do too. We fell silent, and for the first time I felt fear of a truth that didn't yet have a shape. The following weekend we visited the orphanage where he had lived before the adoption, a visit I'd been postponing, but that now seemed inevitable. The building was old, the walls smelling of disinfectant and longing. The older caretakers remembered him fondly. One of them, Mrs. Ruth, said, "Ah, Noah, so tiny when he arrived, so quiet. His mother left only a bag and a letter." "A letter?" I asked. She frowned. "I think it's in the old files. Not sure it's still there." I asked to see it. After a few minutes, she returned with a worn folder, smelling of mildew and memories. Inside, among routine documents, was a carefully folded sheet. The handwriting was familiar. The paper yellowed with time. I read the first lines, and the floor seemed to shift. If one day this boy is found by someone with a kind heart, tell him it was never abandonment. It was love disguised as surrender. Signed, Emily. The words went through me like both a blade and an embrace. Noah watched me, not fully understanding, but sensing that something enormous was happening there. I folded the paper slowly, hands trembling, and asked to leave. In the car, the silence was thick. "Who is Emily?" he asked. "My sister," I said. "And she was my mother?" I couldn't answer. In the following days I lived on the edge between two worlds, the truth begging to be told and the fear of destroying him with it. I spent nights awake, staring at the baby's photo and trying to understand how fate ties lives together with threads so invisible and so cruel. If you've ever gone through something like this, a secret that seemed small and suddenly became the center of your world, tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes stories like this are easier to carry when we know we're not alone. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number. On the other end, a tired, raspy voice. "Is this Michael?" I recognized it instantly. Emily. She said she'd heard about me through an old friend and felt she needed to see me. We met at a roadside cafe, far from any town that could remind us of the past. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. Time had erased the edges of youth, but the eyes were the same. She sat down, ordered a coffee, and didn't touch it. "I need to tell you everything before the world does." And she told me. She spoke of the man she fell in love with who disappeared when he learned of the pregnancy. She spoke of fear, of shame, of loneliness. She said she tried to raise the baby for a few months, but panicked when she realized she couldn't do it alone. I left him there because I thought it was the only way to give him a chance to live without my guilt. I couldn't speak. I just looked at her, trying to reconcile the two versions of the woman I knew, the laughing sister from my childhood and the broken woman in front of me. "Did you see him?" she asked, eyes wet. I took a deep breath. "Every day." She understood before I finished. Her hands covered her face, and her sobbing sounded like a lifetime echoing back. We stayed like that for a while, two halves of a story destiny stitched wrong. When she could speak again, she asked, "Does he know?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Then promise me one thing," she said, gripping my hand. "When the time comes, tell him he was never a mistake. Tell him he was the love I didn't know how to hold." We saw each other a few more times. Emily seemed to be rebuilding herself little by little, but there was too much guilt, and guilt is a house we keep carrying even after we move. Noah noticed I was getting closer to her and began to ask more questions. "She's your sister, right?" "I like her. She talks about me in a different way." I only said she was special, and he smiled without fully understanding why. One day, Emily called with a trembling voice. "Michael, I went to the doctor. It's not good. The diagnosis came cruel and fast, an aggressive tumor, little time." I was silent on the phone, and she said, "Maybe it's time he knew. I don't want to go without him knowing whose heart he inherited." That night, after the call, I sat in the kitchen watching the steam rise from coffee that had already gone cold. The house was silent, but not the same silence as before. This was a living silence, pulsing, full of words that hadn't found form yet. I knew there was a line between what was right and what was bearable, and that from that moment on I would have to cross both. Noah slept in the next room. I heard him turn in bed, murmur something in his sleep, and settle again. And I thought, how do you tell someone that their life is a story told only halfway? The days went on, but everything felt wrapped in an invisible film of urgency. Emily began treatment. I went with her whenever I could. Noah, not fully understanding, left her little notes, drawings of sons, short messages. Get well soon. You are strong. Emily kept each one, as if it were a medal. She lost weight quickly. Her hair began to fall out, and with it went what little vanity she had left. Strangely, she seemed more beautiful, not in the usual sense, but in her gaze. It was as if, by losing the body, she had found the soul. I spent my life running from who I am, Michael, she said one day, voice weak but steady. Now I have nowhere left to run. At one appointment, the doctor asked me to sign some caregiver documents. When I picked up the pen, he looked at the surname on the form, and then at me. Funny, he said. That's the same name as the birth mother of the boy you adopted, isn't it? My whole body went cold. I just nodded, not knowing what to say. The truth, which had lived in the dark corner, was now moving toward the light. That night, Emily called. Her voice trembled, but carried that calm that only comes when fear is tired. You have to tell him, Michael, before time tells it for us. And if he hates me? Then he'll hate you with the truth. Better than loving a ghost. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the versions of me that boy already knew. The man who adopted him, the father who tried to learn, the friend who listened without judging. Now I'd become another, the man who lied without meaning to but lied. In the morning I made pancakes, his favorite, and waited for him to come down. He sat, smiled, said he was hungry. I was too, but not for food, for courage. Noah, I need to tell you something. He looked at me, still chewing. Sounds serious. It is. I told him slowly. I spoke about my sister, her disappearance, the letter, the illness. I talked about the orphanage, the ribbon, the photo. When I said that his mother was Emily, he stopped breathing for an instant. Then he put his hands on the table, as if to hold on to a world shifting under his feet. So you're my uncle? He asked, with a mix of confusion and fear. I'm more than that, Noah. I'm your grandfather. The silence that followed was a kind of storm. He stood up, without shouting, without crying, and went to his room. He closed the door slowly, a delicacy that hurt more than any slammed door. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to the absence of footsteps. I tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy. The house that had been a shelter was now a field of echoes. For 2 days, he barely spoke to me. He answered what was necessary, politely, and it was that politeness that hurt the most. I tried to give space, not to intrude. At night, I heard his muffled crying through the wall, and forced myself not to run to him. Sometimes loving is enduring not being accepted. On the 3rd day, he called me. Can I see her? You can, I said, my heart almost too big for my chest. We went to the hospital together. Emily was weak, but when she saw Noah, her eyes lit like a candle in a dark room. He entered slowly, unsure of what to say. She extended her hand. He, hesitant, held it. They stayed like that for long minutes, just looking at each other. There were no explanations left, only recognition. I looked for you in every face, she whispered. And you were so close. He didn't cry. He just rested his forehead against hers and said, You could have left me, but you didn't forget me. I think I understand. When we left the hospital, the sky was copper-colored. Noah was silent the whole way. At the gate, he turned to me and said, She's my mother, but you were the first one who stayed. Does that still count? It counts for everything, I said. He hugged me, an unhurried hug, the kind that forgives before it speaks. If you're listening now, maybe you've also carried the weight of a forgiveness that had to arrive before the explanation. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, which city, which corner of the world. I love imagining where this story finds you. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. That way I know you're here, and we can make it to the end together. In the following days, Noah visited Emily often. He brought flowers, drawings, stories from school. She smiled, even when the pain tightened. Sometimes I stood outside, watching through the window. It was beautiful and cruel at the same time, to see life and farewell coexist in the same room. One afternoon, she called me over. I want him to know I was afraid, but I never regretted loving him. Promise you'll remember that when I can't say it anymore. I promise, I said. A few weeks later, she was gone. No drama, no long goodbye. Just a sigh. Noah held her hand. I stood on the other side of the bed. It was the kind of silence that doesn't hurt, the silence that rests. At the funeral, he stood the whole time. He didn't cry. He just let the wind ruffle his hair, as if that was the way the world had to touch him. That night he asked, "Why do good people leave early?" Maybe because the sky needs those who know how to light the way. He stared into nothing for a while and, before sleeping, said, "I think I want to be someone who stays. Like you." The days after the funeral were long, as if time had forgotten how to pass. The house felt smaller, quieter, yet somehow more full of presence. The flowers on the table wilted slowly. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. They seemed to hold the scent of what remained. Noah walked softly through the house, as if afraid to wake a memory. I let silence guide us. I didn't try to force joy or pretty words. I was simply there, breathing beside him, until little by little, he began to return. First came simple questions about work, about dinner, and then the conversations that opened doors. "Do you think she saw me as a mistake?" "She saw you as a miracle that arrived at the wrong time but stayed at the right one," I said. He nodded and looked down. The following week, he found an envelope in his backpack addressed to him in Emily's handwriting. "She must have left it at the hospital," I said. He held it for hours before opening it. When he finally did, he read in silence. Then he placed the paper on the table and handed it to me. I read along. "My son, if life gave me the chance to love you from afar, destiny gave me the grace to see you up close, even if only for a short time. Don't let the past define you, but never forget where the love that brought you here came from. You belong to two beginnings, mine and his. And I want you to know that I rest in peace now that I know you are where you were always meant to be with him." I closed my eyes and felt the weight of those words turn to lightness. Noah rested his head on my shoulder and said nothing. It was as if the world paused for a few seconds just to breathe with us. The months that followed were about rebuilding. The pain didn't leave, but it turned gentler. Life found new sounds, the clink of silverware at dinner, the scratch of pencil on paper, the short laugh returning, shy but true. Noah started drawing again. This time, not windows or reflections, faces. The first was his mother's. Then mine. He showed me the drawing. "Can I hang it here?" "You can. Anywhere you want." He chose the hallway, the same one where, months earlier, we'd hung the painting of the window. Now there were two frames, one of light, one of faces. And somehow, it felt like past and present had finally found the same roof. Noah began talking more about the future. He said he wanted to study art and psychology. "I want to understand what makes people keep their feelings locked away," he explained. I laughed. "If you figure it out, tell me." He smiled. "I think it has to do with fear." I nodded. "And courage," I added. For his birthday, we had a small gathering. Some friends from school came, and I realized how much he'd changed. The shy boy who drew windows was now a young man who laughed out loud, told stories, and hugged without fear. During the birthday song, he looked at me with a smile I'd never seen before and said, "Thank you for staying." That line stayed in me. Thank you for staying. Simple, but it held everything. In the end, love might be exactly that, staying, even when the rest of the world leaves. Sometimes at night, he asks me to tell stories about when I was young. I invent some, mix truths and memories, and he laughs at the parts that sound improbable. One of those nights, he asked, "Do you think I'll ever forget all this?" "You'll forget what hurt," I said. "What made you grow, you won't." In the fall, we received a letter from the hospital with a small donation Emily had made before she died. It was symbolic, but enough for us to create something in her name. Noah suggested starting an art workshop for children in care. "So no one feels as alone as I did," he said. I agreed. We called the project Home of Light. At the opening, Noah gave a simple speech that disarmed me. "I used to think family was the place where you're born. Now I know it's the place where you're received. And I was received twice, by my mother, when she gave me life, and by my grandfather, when he gave me a home." People applauded, but I stayed quiet, just watching. There was a light there that didn't come from the lamps, but from the people. The circle had closed. If you've stayed with me to the end, thank you. Long stories ask for the courage to stay. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love imagining the map of voices around the world. And if this story touched something in you, subscribe. It's the most beautiful way to tell me you want to keep hearing stories that remind us of what truly matters. Today, when I walk through the house, I still feel the smell of coffee, hear the echoes of laughter, the traces of what we've been. Sometimes I look at the frames on the wall and think about everything that changed, and I realize life didn't give me a son. It gave me back the chance to be someone better. And when someone asks me who Noah is to me, I smile and say, he's the boy who taught me that love never comes from blood. It comes from the courage to stay.